Imagine working your whole life to achieve your dream home, only to have someone try to take it away from you, not with force, but with lies, manipulation, and abuse of power. That's exactly what happened to David Brooks when he moved into an upscale neighborhood, only to find himself in the crosshairs of a woman who refused to accept him. But what happens when karma finally catches up? Stay with us until the end. You won't believe how this story unfolds. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. If you love stories of justice and karma, hit that subscribe button and join Inspiring Stories Told. The air in New Orleans was thick with the kind of heat that pressed against your skin like a second layer. The scent of magnolia drifted through the streets, mixing with the distant hum of a jazz saxophone playing somewhere in the distance. It was the kind of evening David Brooks had dreamed about, one where he could finally sit back, relax, and enjoy the rewards of his years of hard work. He stood in the doorway of his new home, a stunning two-story house nestled in the heart of one of the city's most exclusive gated communities. His fingers brushed against the polished wooden frame as he stepped inside, inhaling deeply. This was it. This was the moment. For years, he had sacrificed long shifts at the firehouse, back-to-back deployments in the military, saving every extra penny, skipping vacations, and renting cramped apartments that never quite felt like home. But it had all led him here, to this house. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, soft and full of hope. One day, you'll have a home of your own, David. Not just a place to live, but a place to call yours. And now he finally did. The house was everything he had dreamed of: a wraparound porch, white shutters, a backyard with a crystal-clear pool that sparkled under the Louisiana sun. It was perfect. It was his. The neighborhood was pristine, lined with towering oak trees and multi-million-dollar mansions with white-pillared porches. It looked like something out of a Southern Living magazine, the kind of place where people sipped sweet tea on their verandas and exchanged pleasantries about the weather. But there was something off. David had noticed it the moment the moving truck pulled up. The silence. Not the peaceful, relaxing kind, but the kind that felt deliberate, calculated. He had seen the way his neighbors peeked through their curtains, the way some had paused their afternoon walks to take a long, lingering look before whispering to one another. No one came over to introduce themselves. No one welcomed him to the neighborhood. And then there was her. David first noticed Victoria Lancaster, or Vicky, as her minions called her, standing on the front porch of a massive, colonial-style estate across the street. She was dressed in an expensive white linen dress, her silver blonde hair twisted into a flawless chignon, holding a glass of something that sparkled under the sun. She was staring at him. Not the casual kind of glance a person gives when they're curious about a new neighbor. No, this was different. Her lips were pursed, her eyes narrowed, and there was a look of pure disapproval etched into her face. David raised a hand in a polite wave, forcing himself to smile. She didn't wave back. Instead, she turned abruptly, muttered something into her phone, and disappeared inside. David didn't have to wait long for the first sign of trouble. 3 days after moving in, he found a crisp, white envelope tucked under his front door. Homeowners Association notice. David furrowed his brow as he unfolded the letter. Dear Mr. Brooks, we have received multiple concerns from longtime residents regarding the upkeep of your property. While we welcome all new homeowners to our community, we have certain standards that must be maintained. We kindly request that you address the following issues immediately to avoid penalties. Lawn maintenance concerns. His yard was flawless. Unkempt appearance of property. He had barely unpacked. Concerns over rental status. We only allow homeowners here. David exhaled sharply, clenching his jaw. He had spent the past few days ensuring every blade of grass was perfect, repainting the porch railing, and even hiring a local landscaper to touch up the hedges. The property looked better than half the houses in the neighborhood. This wasn't about his lawn. This was about him. The next few weeks were uneventful, until they weren't. It was a sweltering Saturday afternoon, and David had finally carved out time to do something he had been looking forward to since the moment he moved in, relaxing by his pool. He stretched out on a lounge chair, sunglasses shielding his eyes, a cold beer resting beside him. The sunlight glistened off the rippling water, and for the first time since moving in, he felt like he could finally breathe. Then he heard it, the sharp wail of sirens. David sat up, heart pounding. 2 black and white police cruisers screeched to a halt in front of his driveway. 4 officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters. David felt his stomach drop. Slowly, he stood, raising his hands slightly to show he wasn't a threat. One of the officers, a tall man with a thick New Orleans accent, stepped forward. "Sir, we got a call about a suspicious person trespassing on this property." David's blood turned to ice. His property? A slow, nauseating realization settled in his gut. Vicky. His eyes flicked toward her house. Sure enough, there she was, peering from behind her pristine white curtains, her lips curled into a smug smile. David forced himself to stay calm. Years in the military and the fire department had taught him how to manage his emotions, even in the face of injustice. He took a slow breath and spoke evenly. "Officers, this is my home. I have proof of ownership inside. Would you like to see my deed?" The officers exchanged glances, some looking uncertain. "Sir, we just need to confirm." David cut them off, his voice firm but respectful. "No. What you need to do is check the records before showing up to my house with your hands on your weapons." A tense silence fell over the yard. One of the younger officers cleared his throat, looking suddenly uncomfortable. I think we can verify this at the station. No need for all this." After a long pause, the lead officer nodded reluctantly. "Fine. Let's verify." David didn't move until the last cruiser pulled away. Then he turned to look at Vicky's house. She was still standing behind her curtains, still watching, still smirking. David felt a slow burn rise in his chest. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The morning after the police incident, David Brooks stood in his driveway, arms crossed, staring at the HOA violation notice taped to his mailbox. Another one. He exhaled, unfolding the letter with slow, deliberate movements. Failure to maintain property standards, lawn deterioration, and excessive debris. David's grip tightened on the paper. Lawn deterioration? His grass was freshly mowed, his hedges were trimmed, and his flower beds were immaculate. He had taken extra care to ensure his home was pristine, knowing exactly how neighborhoods like this worked. But that wasn't all. The excessive debris? That had to be referring to the black garbage bags he had left on the curb for pickup the night before. Except the garbage was gone. Not collected, gone. He scanned the street. His neighbors' garbage bags were still there, lined up neatly at the ends of their driveways. The trash collectors hadn't come yet. David's stomach churned. Someone had removed his bags, just to make it look like he had left them out long past collection day. His jaw clenched. He knew exactly who was behind this. Vicky. The pattern continued over the next few weeks. David woke up one morning to find patches of his front lawn turning brown, despite watering it every evening. Confused, he checked his sprinkler system, only to find that someone had tampered with the valves, shutting off the water supply to half his yard. A week later, it happened again. And then came the banging. Late at night, well past midnight, a loud knock echoed through his house. David shot upright in bed, heart hammering. He waited, listening. Nothing. He checked the security cameras. No one was there. The next night, it happened again. And the night after that. When he finally caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure near his front porch, he checked the footage. The person was too far away to make out, but the shape of their hair, the posture, it looked like a woman. It looked like Vicky. A few days later, David stopped at a local coffee shop before heading home. As he waited for his order, he noticed an older couple whispering and glancing at him. At first, he ignored it. He was used to people staring. But then, as he picked up his coffee and turned toward the door, he caught a fragment of their conversation. "That's him. The one from the article. David froze. Article? He pulled out his phone and did a quick search of the neighborhood news. And there it was. A tabloid-style article from a local community blog, complete with a blurry, shadowed photo of him standing in his driveway. The headline made his stomach churn. Is our neighborhood changing for the worse? Unvetted homeowners lowering standards? David felt the blood drain from his face. The article painted him as a suspicious new resident who had already had multiple police encounters and was allegedly causing property values to drop. They even went as far as to call him a potential renter who may not have been properly vetted by the HOA. It was Vicky. David clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore. This was an orchestrated attack. He took another look at the blurry photo. It had been taken at night from across the street. That meant someone had been watching him, taking pictures of him in the dark. This had to stop. That evening, David just wanted to clear his mind. He stopped at a grocery store, picked up some dinner, and drove home, eager to have a quiet night by the pool. But as he pulled into his driveway, something felt off. Before he even got out of his truck, he heard it. Laughter, voices, and then a splashing. David's pulse spiked. He slowly climbed out of his truck, rounded the side of his house, and when his backyard came into view, his breath caught in his throat. There they were, 6 women, lounging in his backyard, sipping champagne and laughing. And in the center of it all, reclining on his lounge chair like she owned the place, was Vicky. David's jaw tightened. His grip on his keys turned white-knuckled. They were in his pool, in his backyard, without permission. A slow wave of white-hot rage rolled through him. What the hell is this? His voice was steady, but there was an edge of danger beneath it. The laughter immediately stopped. The women all turned to look at him, but Vicky just smirked. She lifted her champagne glass in a mock toast. "Oh, darling," she purred. "We assumed you wouldn't mind." David's nostrils flared. "Get out. Now." The women exchanged nervous glances, shifting in their expensive designer swimsuits. One of them, a redhead with oversized sunglasses, whispered, "Vicky, you said he wouldn't be here." David took a step forward. "I said get out." Vicky sighed dramatically, setting down her drink. She stood slowly, adjusting the silk robe draped over her swimsuit. And then she played her trump card. She took a step back, placing a trembling hand to her chest, eyes widening in mock fear. "Why are you being so aggressive?" David's fists clenched. Oh, he saw where this was going. "I don't feel safe," she gasped. You're scaring us." The other women visibly recoiled, their gazes darting between Vicky and David. And then, right on cue, Vicky reached for her phone. "You know what? I think we should call the police," she said, voice laced with artificial concern. "I mean, are you sure this is even your house?" David felt his entire body go still. And then the sirens. Again, red and blue lights flashed against his fence. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt outside his house. David closed his eyes for half a second, forcing down the nausea creeping into his stomach. The officers stepped out, hands on their belts. "Sir, we got a call about a disturbance." David didn't even argue this time, because he already knew how this played out. He was detained right there, in front of his own house, while the 6 trespassing women were given sympathetic looks. And as they escorted him toward the patrol car, he saw her. Vicky, standing near his pool, arms folded, that same self-satisfied smirk stretched across her lips. And in that moment, David knew. This wasn't just about getting rid of him. This was about humiliating him, making him feel powerless. But she had made one mistake. She thought he was going to take this lying down. She had no idea who she was messing with. David has endured humiliation, injustice, and outright theft of his peace, all at the hands of someone who refuses to see him as an equal. How would you feel if this were you? What would you do if the very people meant to protect you kept siding with your enemy? Should David fight back? Or is there another way to expose Vicky for who she really is? Let us know in the comments. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're invested in this story, press 1. Your support keeps these powerful stories coming. David sat in his dimly lit living room, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey on the coffee table. The ice had melted, swirling in the amber liquid, much like the storm of emotions raging inside him. Anger, humiliation, hopelessness. For weeks, he had done everything by the book, stayed polite, followed the rules, filed reports, kept his cool, and yet, none of it mattered. Vicky still won. Every time he tried to reclaim his space, she twisted the situation to make him look like the aggressor. Every time he attempted to live his life in peace, she found new ways to torment him. And the police? They were useless. No matter how many times he explained himself, they always showed up believing her version of events first. It didn't matter that he owned his home. It didn't matter that he had done nothing wrong. The damage was already done. David ran a hand over his face, his frustration simmering just below the surface. He couldn't keep letting her do this. And then, as if a switch flipped in his brain, he heard a voice from years ago, his military training kicking in, clear as day. Stay calm. Gather intel. Strike back smartly. His fists unclenched. His heart steadied. This was war, and he was done playing defense. That night, David took action. He upgraded his security cameras, installing high-definition, motion-activated lenses in strategic spots around his property, his front door, back gate, the driveway, the pool, and one hidden in the oak tree facing Vicky's house. If she was going to keep playing dirty, then he was going to catch her in the act. The next few nights, he barely slept, instead watching his security feed like a hawk. And then, it happened. It was just past 1 a.m. when the alert buzzed on his phone. Motion detected. Backyard. David, now trained to react instantly, tapped the live feed. His heart jumped into his throat. There, moving slowly and carefully, was Vicky. Dressed in all black, her blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail, she crept along the fence like a thief in the night. And she wasn't alone. She had a plastic jug in her hands. David narrowed his eyes. What the hell was she doing? Then he saw it. She knelt by the edge of his pool, unscrewed the cap of the jug, and began pouring the contents into the water. David's blood ran cold. Bleach. She was pouring bleach into his pool. His pulse thundered in his ears. Vicky Lancaster, the woman who had publicly accused him of being a threat, the woman who had called the police on him repeatedly, the woman who had painted him as a danger to the neighborhood, was now committing a felony right on his property. And she had no idea she was being recorded. David leaned back in his chair, watching, waiting. Then, karma intervened. As Vicky stepped backward, smug with herself, her heel caught on the pool ladder. Her arms flailed wildly. The now empty bleach jug flew into the water before she lost her balance entirely. Splash. The moment her body hit the water, David let out the first genuine laugh he had in weeks. Oh, this was priceless. She thrashed and sputtered, completely soaked, before dragging herself out of the pool, dripping wet, coughing, and fuming. Then, like the entitled villain she was, she checked her surroundings, brushing the wet strands of hair from her face, before making a frantic, pathetic dash toward her house. And the best part? The camera caught every second. Clear as day. HD. Vicky Lancaster. Trespassing. Vandalizing. Caught red-handed. David watched the footage twice, just to make sure it was real. Then, for the first time in weeks, he smiled. By morning, David had already backed up the footage on multiple drives. It was time to strike. Vicky had spent weeks weaponizing the HOA, the police, and even the media against him. Now, it was her turn to be on the receiving end. David started by emailing the footage to the HOA board, to the local police department, and to the very same neighborhood tabloid that had smeared his name. The subject line? Caught in the act, a story about real crime in the neighborhood. Within hours, the responses came flooding in. It started with the HOA president. David received an email laced with panic. They wanted to meet immediately. By noon, 2 officers knocked on his door, but this time, They weren't there for him. They were there for Vicky. Word had spread fast. The footage circulated like wildfire, and the neighborhood's collective sympathy for Vicky evaporated overnight. People who once looked at David with suspicion now whispered about her instead. By the evening, the tabloid that had smeared him published a follow-up article. The headline? Exclusive. Longtime resident caught in shocking act of trespassing and vandalism. The blurry photo of David from the first article? Gone. In its place? A crystal-clear image of Vicky, dripping wet, standing by his pool, bleach bottle in hand. David scrolled through the comments. Wow, so she was the problem all along? How embarrassing. If I were her, I'd move. David should press charges. POV, when karma comes for you faster than Amazon Prime. He let out a slow, satisfied breath. But the best part was yet to come. Later that evening, as David grilled a steak on his back patio, he heard it, a loud, authoritative knock. From his vantage point, he could see two officers standing at Vicky's doorstep. She answered, draped in an expensive silk robe, trying to compose herself, but her face was pale. David could almost hear the conversation from across the street. Then handcuffs. Vicky Lancaster was being escorted off her porch, humiliated, furious, and absolutely powerless. As she was placed in the squad car, their eyes met. David raised his beer bottle in salute. For the first time since this nightmare started, he felt something new. Not just relief. Victory. The satisfaction of seeing Vicky Lancaster hauled away in handcuffs should have been enough. Justice had been served. The neighborhood finally saw her for the manipulative, entitled villain she was. But David knew people like Vicky didn't go down that easily. It had only been a day since her arrest, and already, she was back in her house, spinning the ultimate victim narrative. By the next morning, she had managed to get out on bail, and by the afternoon, she was already on a mission to regain control. The whispers in the neighborhood started immediately. It was just a misunderstanding. She's been here for years. She wouldn't do something like that. David must have set her up. And that was when David realized she wasn't done. So neither was he. If she thought she could lie her way back into power, she had another thing coming. David spent the next 2 days planning his final move. He needed a lesson that Vicky and the entire community would never forget. That's when he remembered something his old military buddy once told him about pool maintenance dyes. There was a type of non-toxic chemical used by professionals to detect leaks in pool systems. Completely invisible in water, but when mixed with specific chemicals, like expensive makeup, perfume, and sunscreen, it reacted. The result? A vivid, unmistakable purple stain that took days to fade. Perfect. With a bit of research, David found exactly what he needed. He ordered a commercial-grade version of the dye, ensuring it was harmless but long-lasting. The final touch? He adjusted his security cameras, setting them to capture everything. And then, he waited. By Friday afternoon, David started hearing the rumors. Vicky was throwing a pool party. A small gathering to support neighborhood unity, she claimed. In reality, it was a desperate attempt to reclaim her power. She needed to remind everyone that she was still in charge. And just as David predicted, by Saturday morning, she was on the phone, loudly making sure people knew she had secured access to a luxury pool. His pool. David smirked as he packed up his car, making sure she saw him drive away. But instead of leaving the neighborhood, he parked around the corner, slipped through his side gate, and settled into his home office, watching the security feed. It was showtime. At precisely 2 p.m., Vicky made her grand entrance. She sauntered through his backyard gate like she owned the place, followed by 8 of her equally wealthy, equally entitled friends. Each one of them was dressed in expensive designer swimsuits, oversized sunglasses, and wide-brimmed hats. They carried bottles of champagne, luxury tote bags, and, most importantly, slathered on layers of high-end sunscreen and scented body oils. David couldn't help but grin. Perfect. Vicky took her usual spot, his lounge chair, adjusting her sunglasses and tilting her face toward the sun. "Ladies, welcome back to our private retreat," she purred. The women laughed, raising their glasses. And then, one by one, they slipped into the water. At first, nothing happened. The water remained crystal clear. They sipped champagne. They gossiped. But then, the first scream. "Oh my God, what is happening to my skin?" One of the women shot out of the water, dripping wet, staring in horror at her arms. A deep, unnatural shade of purple was spreading across her skin, darkening by the second. Then, another scream. Then another. Panic exploded through the group as they scrambled to get out of the pool, clawing at their skin. Vicky was the last to notice. Reclining in the chair, she lazily turned her head. And then she saw it. Her arms, her legs, her million-dollar face. All bright purple. The moment realization hit, she let out a shriek so loud it could shatter glass. "What is this?" David had to bite his fist to keep from laughing. Her guests were freaking out, checking their phones for emergency dermatologists, crying about upcoming country club events and weddings. One woman collapsed onto the patio, sobbing, "I have a gala on Wednesday. My husband is going to kill me." But nothing was more satisfying than the pure horror on Vicky's face. The queen had finally fallen. David had every second of it recorded. And he didn't wait. By the next morning, he had uploaded a perfectly edited clip to multiple platforms. Title: HOA Queen Gets the Karma of a Lifetime. Within hours, it exploded. Millions of views. Thousands of comments, shares, and memes. The internet ate it up. "This is the best thing I've ever seen. Ever. Can we start a GoFundMe to keep David's pool protected forever? Why do Karens always learn the hard way?" The way she screamed LMFAO. Local news picked up the story. Then national media. By Monday morning, Vicky's entire life had imploded. Her real estate clients dropped her. Her company terminated her contract. And the HOA? They turned on her immediately. A formal vote was held. Vicky Lancaster was removed from the board. She had gone from queen to outcast overnight. And David? For the first time since moving in, his neighbors treated him like he belonged. The same people who once whispered behind his back now stopped to shake his hand. 2 weeks later, a for sale sign appeared in Vicky's yard. David watched from his front porch as moving trucks carried away the last remnants of her existence. She avoided eye contact, her once pristine confidence now reduced to bitter silence. And as her car pulled out of the driveway, David couldn't help himself. He raised a glass in salute. Checkmate. The final HOA meeting was packed. David had never seen so many residents show up at once. People who had previously stayed silent. Neighbors who had once avoided looking in his direction, all now eagerly waiting for the downfall of Vicky Lancaster. He sat near the back, arms crossed, watching as Vicky took her usual seat at the front of the room. But for the first time, she wasn't leading the meeting. She was the subject of it. Her skin had returned to its normal color, but her reputation was permanently stained. Gone was the arrogant smirk, the air of superiority she had once carried like a crown. Instead, she sat stiffly, flipping through a thick folder of papers, no doubt trying to pull one last desperate play to keep her standing in the community. The HOA president, an older gentleman who had once defended her, now cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Victoria Lancaster, due to the recent incidents, including documented trespassing, vandalism, and inappropriate behavior unbecoming of an HOA board member, we are holding an emergency vote to determine your status in this community. A murmur rippled through the room. Vicky stood, plastering on her signature fake smile. "I think we all know that this has been a horrible misunderstanding," she began, her voice sugary sweet but edged with desperation. "I have only ever done what is best for this neighborhood. I have dedicated years, years, to maintaining our property values, ensuring that we uphold the highest standards." A soft hum interrupted her. Someone, somewhere in the room, had started humming. Purple Rain. A single chuckle broke out. Then another. Vicky snapped her head toward the sound, her eyes blazing. Who? But it was too late. The entire room erupted into laughter. David bit the inside of his cheek to keep from grinning. Vicky's face flushed beet red. She slammed her folder shut and gripped the table in front of her. This is outrageous. I have given everything to this neighborhood. You're seriously going to believe that man over me? The moment she said it, the room fell silent. That man. She had said it with so much venom, so much thinly veiled racism, that it was like a slap across the face to everyone in the room. The HOA president sighed, taking off his glasses. That man, Mrs. Lancaster, is a respected homeowner who has done nothing but endure harassment from you since the moment he moved in. And thanks to his security footage, we now have undeniable proof of your actions. He turned to the rest of the room. All in favor of removing Victoria Lancaster from the HO board? A sea of hands shot into the air. Vicky's chest rose and fell rapidly. Her mouth opened and closed, as if she were struggling to form a sentence. But there was nothing left to say. She had lost. She snatched her designer handbag off the table, whirled around, and stormed out of the meeting, nearly knocking over an elderly woman in the process. David exhaled, shaking his head. It was finally over. It didn't take long. Within a week, a for sale sign appeared on Vicky's manicured front lawn. By the second week, moving trucks lined the street, carrying out the last remnants of her old life. David watched from his front porch, sipping his morning coffee, as Vicky barked orders at the movers, her frustration palpable. She had always been so composed, so calculating. But now she just looked tired, defeated. As her car pulled out of the driveway for the last time, she made the mistake of looking in his direction. David raised his mug in a slow, deliberate toast. Vicky scowled, sped up, and disappeared down the street. And just like that, she was gone. 2 months later, a new family moved in. The Johnson family, a young, interracial couple with twin daughters. David had never seen the neighborhood so welcoming. The HOA, under new leadership, personally introduced them to the community. Neighbors who had once stayed silent during David's ordeal now went out of their way to be kind. The change was palpable. And David? For the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't since moving here. Peace. The first Saturday after the Johnson family settled in, David decided it was time to do something he hadn't done in months. Throw a pool party. But this time, everyone was invited. The Johnson twins squealed in delight as they jumped into the water, their parents laughing as they set up food on the patio. The Rodriguez family from down the street brought homemade empanadas. Even the HOA president showed up, holding a plate of ribs and a cold beer. David, lounging in his rightful chair, took it all in. His pool was no longer a battleground. His home was truly his. As he sipped his drink, he glanced at the small framed photo he had placed near the pool gate. It was a screenshot from his security footage, a group of people running down the street, their skin an unmistakable shade of purple. He chuckled to himself. Karma always had a way of making a splash. At its core, this story isn't just about a battle between a homeowner and a manipulative neighbor. It's about something much deeper: resilience, justice, and the power of standing up for yourself. David Brooks walked into his dream home with hope, hard work, and the belief that he had finally earned peace. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Instead of a warm welcome, he was met with prejudice, manipulation, and an enemy determined to push him out of his own home. Many of us have faced our own versions of a Vicky Lancaster, people who abuse their power, use the system against us, and expect to win simply because they always have. But this story is proof that bullies don't win forever. David could have lashed out, gotten angry, and fought fire with fire, and no one would have blamed him. But he knew the smarter way to win was with patience, strategy, and evidence. He let Vicky dig her own grave while he simply documented every lie, every crime, and every moment of entitlement. And when the time was right, he struck. And isn't that a lesson for all of us? When faced with injustice, don't act recklessly, act wisely. Document. Prepare. Let the truth be your weapon. Because when you let karma do its thing, the fall of the wicked is far more satisfying than any angry outburst could ever be. This story also proves the importance of community. For so long, David felt alone, isolated, surrounded by people who stayed silent while he suffered. But by the end, after he stood his ground, people finally opened their eyes. They saw the truth. They saw who the real villain was, and they came together to make things right. That's how change happens. One person standing up can shift the balance, forcing those around them to choose a side, and when the truth is undeniable, justice wins. So ask yourself, how would you have handled it? If you were in David's shoes, could you have endured the humiliation, the false accusations, and the endless harassment? Would you have had the patience to wait for the perfect moment to turn the tables? Because that's what separates those who let injustice win from those who rewrite the story. And speaking of stories, this is just the beginning. If you enjoyed watching David's journey, if you felt that rush of satisfaction when Vicky finally got what she deserved, then show your support. Like this video to show that you stand with David. Comment below, what was your favorite moment? And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we have more stories of karma, justice, and epic revenge coming soon. Because in the end, stories like this aren't just about entertainment. They're about proving that doing the right thing, standing your ground, and letting karma handle the rest is the best revenge of all. Stay tuned. The next story might be even better.